And it's Groundhog Day again. This means you also made it to the second part of the many reasons why I love Groundhog Day, the movie. And we're resuming with a 6, or maybe the 6.5 reason why I love Groundhog Day. And it has to do with ego. Because Phil learns that his own needs and wants are rather unobtainable and unreliable, just like his mind, as he often wants petty laziness, weakness, or just the absence of feeling. He wants to be numb to the world. And when he begins to realize that others have problems, especially problems that are bigger and more meaningful and disturbing than his own, he can start to alleviate some of these problems working from small to large, and he starts to help them and worry less about his own insignificant problems, like being snowed in or his supposed misfortune. In this way, he also gains new perspective and some measure of gratitude in the presence of his new, seemingly impossible circumstances, and he also gains purpose that gives him some sort of light and hope. And I believe that that's something that, I guess in my mind, is not immediate when I think of it, but when I reflect on it, like I've done a lot today, it's one of the things that kind of fuels my obsession, but it's in the foreground, it's in the back of my mind, and there's not necessarily one word that I can encapsulate that with. The next thing, the seventh thing, a pretty big reason in terms of Phil's learning and journey towards maturity is death, but also in the sort of a major source of his learning about death is the importance of time. And so these is one reason, but these two are sort of interconnected. I mean, among other things, the pandemic has given many people, including myself, a perspective concerning the certainty of death, and without knowing for certain how much time we'll have until death happens. During these times in particular, I find that this film is sort of a warning, but also a reminder to appreciate every moment with friends, loved ones, or just moments in your community that otherwise maybe you wouldn't fully respect. Without reflecting on your finite time and mortality, you might not have appreciated as fully. Phil goes through one of these moments, and he's relatively immature. In these scenes, you sort of see where he's confronting the old man and he's trying to take care of him and he's trying to save his life, as a cliche might be. But over the course of these scenes, he sorts it out in his mind and he realizes there's no way that he can prevent this man's death. His carelessness is another thing. And in the beginning, he had no reason to care about the guy. He would just walk by him and sometimes would pat his pockets and pretend to care. To my estimation, I believe this whole learning about death scenes sort of illustrates to me, it demonstrates just how immature he is and far removed from death he is. He's not confronted with death on a daily basis. And I think in the Western world, and you might get accustomed to not dealing with death on a daily basis. And I suppose that's a lot of places in the world. In the modern day, you don't see a whole lot of filled coffins. And unless you've gone to a lot of funerals or you work at a mortuary or something like that, a lot of times these things are removed from life. So this might be sort of a cultural critique too, but I think it's just appreciating that death is natural and that whoever you know or whoever you appreciate is going to be gone sometime. And the sooner you can appreciate them now, the better, because you don't know how long you'll have with these people. And I think Phil's character is just going through this. He's learning this for maybe the first time. Maybe he knew this consciously or not. It doesn't really matter in terms of the movie. You can see him learning that that man has intrinsic worth. And maybe in some sense he knew it before, but it wasn't as palpable as seeing him die several times and knowing that he's powerless to do anything about it, because sometimes people just die. The eighth thing that I like to focus on in terms of my obsession with this movie is Phil's growth in terms of responsibility and humility. I think a large part of his learning in terms of maturity, which again is one of the meta themes that I really think is central to at least my understanding of the film, is that in the beginning, Phil takes very little responsibility. He's not very humble. He has inflated ego. He's inflated self-opinion, and he's pretty self-obsessed. He's got to tell everybody, don't you know who I am? And he just has a sort of blatant arrogant attitude towards the world. And I think it's worth noting that Phil, in the beginning of the film, defines himself as just a weatherman. But towards the end, he acts more humble, and he's just sort of a person that happens to know a lot of things, but he doesn't need to show that off, and he's a lot less ostentatious in manner, and he doesn't feel the need to tell anyone he's a minor celebrity, or try and throw his weight around in terms of his importance. And this, I believe, reflects more on a sense of growing responsibility to other people, and because he really respects other people in a more compassionate way than he did before. He shows a better, more moral composition over the majority of the film, and towards the end, you can sort of see that progress. The ninth and the 10th points that really draw me back into the movie are community and humanity. And for me, these really go hand in hand. Phil, as we've mentioned, was a know-it-all, but by the end, he manages to be a more well-integrated member of a town, of a society, and a community. And this is what brings me, so the ninth is community. And he didn't know anyone before. He didn't care about anything or anyone really. It was all shallow interest. There was very little meaning for him. And in him leaving this sense of cynical way of relating to the world, especially to the community, he starts moving away from making people feel stupid, and he starts to become a member of a community. He starts to develop skills, and he starts to accumulate knowledge that he uses to benefit those around him. And I believe this is, again, another sign of his maturity. He realizes that doing what he's been done for years is going to pretty much just get him where he's been, hating Punxsutawney, but still having to go there, hating spending time with his coworkers when instead he could relate to them better. And I think he starts to realize that in a sense this is all mental conditions. These are self-imposed conditions that he makes worse by not dealing with them in a proper way. And despite being a grown man, he deals with his life in sort of an immature, childish way, in the sense that he's very pouty, and he even makes his coworkers deal with him as if he's the talent, as he would call it. And while he's been doing it, and there's probably other people that do that in minor celebrity status, definitely there are, but it doesn't make him seem better. It doesn't make his life better. And people talk about him and resent him behind his back. There's very, very little sense in which if he didn't do that, his trajectory would be just bleak. It would just be, he would be right back where he started at the beginning. And while a lot of people go through life like that, it's depressing to see in a movie. And seeing that, you might call it just catharsis. You see all this tension be relieved in a meaningful way, and you see these bad qualities being purged throughout the film. It's something that when I watch, it's a habitual feeling of like relief and in a sense a small sense of happiness. It's very interesting to me, and I think it's one of the things that watching it initially I didn't exactly understand, but having watched it several times and thought about it a lot, something that maybe you might notice that you feel similarly about, and if so, that's cool. And that brings me to the 10th point, which is mainly about Phil's understanding of humanity, because eventually after Phil has helped the Punxsutawney people, he's been in Punxsutawney for a really, really long time. He's lived the same life, seems like so many times throughout the first day, and to the same day, he starts to appreciate all the people. And he starts to become more of a member of the world, not just of the community, and I get the sense, at least, that he starts to appreciate humans for being individuals and having needs, wants, and having problems that maybe in a small way he can change the trajectory of. Even if it's something small like buying tickets for people to WWE, you can make a difference in people's lives. And he becomes a member of the world, so to speak, or a citizen of the cosmos, as a Hellenistic philosopher might say. To me, this means that he starts to relate to all people a little bit more compassionately, and certainly less in a cynical way. He starts to understand that other people aren't so different from him, and he starts to develop a sense of compassion overall towards all people, because all human lives have intrinsic value. Now I'd like to move on finally to the final promised bonus. And this is going to be roughly about the Buddhist worldview. I have some rough corollaries to mention in regard to the Groundhog Day film. And I'm going to start by just saying that most Buddhist doctrines strive for the happiness of all sentient beings in particular. And they do this by eliminating the three most harmful emotions as they see them. And this is usually by starting with anger or hate. They seem very similar to me, but I think there probably is a difference for them. So let's say hatred, greed, and ignorance. So Phil, as it turns out, more or less resolves the three emotional states in the movie. And I'm going to start by just saying, from the beginning, he's indignant about not returning to Pittsburgh. He's a city dweller. He wants to stay there, right? But the end, he wants to stay in Punxsutawney with Rita indefinitely. And to me, this demonstrates a development from anger and anxiety about a situation to equanimity by making peace with a situation that he wasn't okay with. Next, we have Phil, who has a somewhat greedy approach to life when he sort of values Punxsutawney only as a means to obtaining money through working towards his job, maybe a promotion or something like that, by going there just to shut up his boss so he won't get fired. This shallow attitude is kind of replaced with a deeper respect for the small town that he once resented. And for me, this represents just a work from greed to appreciation and gratitude. Now, the third one, so Phil is ignorant of quite a lot throughout the initial scenes, beginning of the movie, especially about what is genuinely important in life. But at the end, once he helps various other people, he demonstrates compassion for others and respect for all human lives. I'm not sure about all sentient lives, but at least human lives in my estimation. And I think, among other things, he demonstrates a significant move from all-encompassing ignorance to compassion, respect, and at least a working knowledge of what it means to be human, and at that, a good human. And I think at this point, there's a lot of other potential Buddhist connections and corollaries, but I'm not well knowledgeable enough to speak on those in a sense that I would be happy with what I have to say. So I'm just going to cut it off there, but I think that adequately sums up what I find interesting about the Groundhog Day film, as well as, at the end, some Buddhist tie-ins. And I bet there's a whole bunch of things that you guys have actually thought about, like, oh, that's similar, I don't like that, I like this. You know what, that's awesome. That's why this movie's awesome, and I'd like you to, if you have that sort of feeling, hey, you didn't mention blank, go ahead and post it. I also made a couple more videos about Groundhog Day, and to me, it's like a tradition to talk about Groundhog Day right before Groundhog Day, during Groundhog Day, and right after it. And so that's why I made this video. And maybe if this one does well, make another one in the future. So I appreciate you watching, appreciate you listening, and I hope you enjoy your Groundhog Day. Thank you very much.